Hey, this is John Gilroy. I'm sitting in a barbecue joint with a Christmas tree made out of empty whiskey bottles and sitting across from David Linthicum. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. In front of me, we have world-famous Dave Linthicum, author of many books, and he's also the Chief Cloud Strategy Officer at Deloitte Consulting. Today, we're going to talk about two topics: the federal government and the cloud. We talk about a book called An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing by none other than David Linthicum. I read this guy named Simon Sinek, and he says, start with why. So, David, why? Why'd you write this book?
Well, somebody had to tell the truth. My clients really loved the fact that I got beyond the marketing hype, and I also support this in my InfoWorld blog, and getting down to the reality of what this stuff does and also what it doesn't do. So there's about $20 billion of marketing out there in the cloud space, and so it's very difficult to get to the real answers into what's the pragmatic use of this technology. So I had these discussions so many times and so many emails and so many blogs, I decided to write a book about it to answer a lot of the questions that I think people have asked in an honest way and kind of tell the truth.
My wife is a Latin teacher, so I am permitted to use big fancy words. So I'm going to use a big fancy word and impress people. The word I'm going to use is iconoclast. Because when I read this book and take notes, there are some very provocative statements that you make in this book. You are shaking some people up and not falling for a lot of the malarkey that is out there. And page 69, where is AI overkill? Dave, AI is the answer for the next 100 years. It's everything. It's going to cook dinner for you tonight. It's going to wash your car. AI is everything. Why could you say something like AI is overkill?
Well, I love using AI. I was AI analyst. It was the first job out of college, and I'm 62. So just that's how long AI has been around. But the reality is, like any technology, it can be misapplied, and it's also very expensive. It eats a lot of CPUs. It eats a lot of data. And we have to use it in very pragmatic ways. And so in many instances, in fact, we're seeing this today with AI washing that's going on. People are just kind of rewriting their marketing materials to push it into the AI space. They're AI enabling different technologies, whether it needs to or not. And in many instances, you kind of have to ask yourself why we're doing this and what problems are we looking to solve, whether it's a business or whether you're developing technology or doing self-driving car auto technology, things like that. So it's a fantastic tool. I believe in it. It can be used to do amazing things, but you have to be very careful where it's applied because it's also very expensive and it adds risk.
In fact, the last chapter of your book, you answer the why question. You talk about being candid and pragmatic. And I think that's what many of your answers are in this book. In fact, it's going to challenge the youngsters out there, anyone under 30 is a youngster for me, into realizing that AI and ML are old concepts with new life thanks to cloud computing. Page 66.
Yeah. I mean, cloud computing made it affordable. I mean, the big thing when I first got into AI, when I just got out of college, I was doing Lisp and M1 programming, and I thought it was amazing technology. But to implement any of this stuff, it was a minimum $20 million in hardware to get this stuff up and running. And so the reality is most businesses couldn't afford it. And even the global one, the government, in many instances, it was out of their budgetary ranges as well. And so it floundered because of that. And so it wasn't until the implementation of cloud computing, we're able to buy this as a utility, as a service, did it make it finally affordable. And that's why we're seeing re-interest in AI right now, because not only is it very capable in what it does, certainly the generative AI technology, very impressive, but we can afford to use it. In many instances, it's almost free for some use cases.
Years ago when I was on NPR, I used to read your books, and for some reason, I thought you lived in California because he's a computer guy. He's talking about this high-tech stuff. Turns out you live right here in Northern Virginia. I was surprised, and I had you on my radio show back then, and I said, aren't you in California? No. Well, because you're in this area, you understand the federal government and some of the unique needs that it has. And in your book, you said that AI is the single most valuable thing you can do in the cloud. Does that apply to our govies as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And government really is a set of processes that are typically unique to what they do. And the reality is we can apply AI in many instances to automate and get them closer to achieving better use of the mission. And so that's what I hear all the time is, in other words, we do things that are very unique that need to be done in a certain way. We need to use whatever technology that we can apply to optimize the ability for us to do that. In many instances, that's going to be AI. And that's why AI should always be a contender for what we look at it. That's why we do architecture. It shouldn't always be the default answer. But the reality is we need to figure out what value this technology has, how it applied in a particular space. The government is a huge potential user for AI technologies just because of the number of things that need to be automated and re-automated.
I use the fancy word iconoclast because there are a lot of statements in this book that people are going to be shocked by if they just sit back and realize what you said. I talked about AI before, but page 106 of your book, you said cost is overlooked when considering best development and architectural approach. Wow, there's some companies and towns that don't want to hear that, do they?
They don't. And the reality is that we're building up a lot of technical debt because a lot of mistakes are being made. And I always hear this at the end, that it works. I said, well, Dave, we may not have picked the technology that's optimized for our particular instance, but it works. But it may cost you $30 million more a year to operate these things. That removes resources from the business. It removes budget from the government's agencies in leveraging the technology, and that's going to lead to ultimately failure, at least sub-optimized business or sub-optimized government agencies. And so just because it works, that's no longer the metric. It has to be optimized using the right technology applied in the right way to look at the cost, but look at the value that's coming back to the government, look at the value that's coming back to the business.
I'm going to tweet out all these things because some of these things are really goading the bull and kind of pushing him here. Okay, page 87. There's a podcast in town called Feds at the Edge. And edge computing is one of the chapters of your book. You talk about that a lot. And here's a quote. This is so good, too. Edge computing will increase development and operation costs threefold. Well, some people don't want to hear that.
Well, the reality is it's true. I mean, people who price these systems out see quickly that it's very expensive to deploy something that's going to be at the edge, which means you're going to have multiple of a device or similar systems that have to be maintained and have to be operated. So we're dealing with another platform. We're making things more heterogeneous. And the reality is that we have to cost those things in. It's going to be an additional cost. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be implemented, but you have to look at the cost trade-off of leveraging any of this stuff.
And I think that's a key factor. My son and I went to see that Maverick movie over the summer. I thought about the early quest, show me the money. And I think this is a topic that many of my previous guests don't want to bring up very much. They want to talk about the cost of cloud computing. And most of my previous guests never wanted to answer on the topic of the cost of leaving the cloud. No. Don't talk about that, John. But this is an expense that people don't realize. It's almost like the heroin dealer. Hey, first one's free. Yeah, second one's $5. Next one, $500. It's like, hey, come on in the cloud. Come on, Dave. Come on down. It's free. Come in. Well, now you want to leave. Well, get your wallet out, buddy, huh? And so that's a topic that you mentioned in the book several times, but it's important that people realize that, the egress costs.
Yeah, if you move data outside the cloud, it's going to cost a lot of money, and people don't understand that to be the case. In so many instances, they go, we're going to develop a hybrid cloud environment where our processes and data exist partially on-premise and partially in the cloud, and we're going to move any number of data in between them. So the ability to do that, integrate that data set, is going to bring a huge amount of expense to doing it. That's why you kind of want to leave data where it lies and host the data closest to where it's going to be consumed and managed. And that's kind of a rule of building cloud architectures or any architectures for that matter. But specifically, you're going to be penalized in the cloud because it's not like owning things on premise where you can move it over your own private network. You're going to have to pay for it and pay big.
11 chapters in this book, and each chapter ends with a call to action. It's like, okay, bend over back and tell this, now this is what you do for this topic. This is what you do for this topic. It's, I think a federal listener could just buy this book and then have a little note card for each one of the calls to action as a reminder every day. I mean, it's a very specific calls to action. It's almost like, okay, I spent a lot of time in this whole chapter. Now here's the walkaways. Here's what you do next, and in the next chapter. So it's very practical, isn't it?
It is, and that's why I wrote the book. I mean, there's a lot of books that get into very, esoteric concepts and a lot of things, and I certainly have written those books in my career, but the reality is people just want to hear the bottom line. They want to hear how to use this technology in a way, and they want to hear actions, things that they can take to go off and solve some of these issues. It's one thing to define a problem and define it well and define it as something that's very complex, but it's another thing to put the stepwise way in which you solve the problems. And I think that's probably the most important aspect of this book or any kind of advice that people get. It's not defining a concept and understanding the concept. We're very good at that. It's the ability to look at these and how we define them into a problem, how we define the solution sets, and how we apply technology to solve the problem. That's the harder piece to do, and I think that's what people want to focus on right now.
You mentioned earlier your enjoyment working with customers and clients and solving problems. I used to work with a lot of software developers. I remember years ago when the person I work with put in a proposal and then the price of storage dropped. He was really happy. He was like, yeah, this is great. But I think what you bring out in your book is that cloud storage is not always a solution, even if it is cheaper. It's like it's a shiny dangling thing, and you want to always go to that, but that may not be the solution for every federal agency. So I think that's kind of important to delineate, isn't it?
Yeah, you have to do a cost analysis and a benefit analysis on all this stuff. Cloud storage is no different. I understand it's very easy to provision in the cloud. In many instances, it can be cheaper, but for the most part, compared to on-premise systems are going to be cheaper per gigabyte per storage because the prices have just gone way down in the last 10 years. And so there has to be a reason, something other than cost, into leaving it in the cloud and to leverage cloud computing. You may have the agility aspect of it. You may have to scale at some point in time. The cloud is going to be clearly scalable. The cloud, you may have some advanced architecture that you're looking to use, such as AI technology, which is going to be native on a particular cloud provider that you're leveraging. It has to be other reasons to leverage cloud other than just cost, because if you look at the cost comparison, it's always going to be cheaper to remain on-premise.
Yeah, and I think many of our federal listeners can answer that with different reasons besides cost, but it's a whole separate topic there. There are companies that specialize in managing the hybrid cloud, public cloud, private cloud, all kinds of different clouds out there. So it just reflects the complexity involved in this. And so what we're dealing with is a brave new world of cheap storage, easy compute at the edge, but the price you pay is complexity.
It is, and it has a name. It's called cloud sprawl. And that's because everybody who has an idea, and they were on a single cloud provider, and they leveraged different services on that provider, and they needed services that were best of breed on another provider, and then yet another provider, and perhaps a managed service provider, and a colo provider, and perhaps some of their existing on-premise systems, where suddenly they went from, say, 3,000 services under management to 10,000 services under management, and they're trying to do that and operationalize it with the same amount of resources, same amount of people, same amount of skill sets, things like that. So the industry has a name for it. It's called a complexity wall. In other words, we just don't have enough resources to run this thing at the level of complexity and heterogeneity that it's at. So something's got to give. Either we're going to do a very bad job in operating the system because we're spreading our resources too thin, or we're going to figure out an architecture way to simplify this complexity to make it more manageable, which is really where people need to focus. So as they're building things, you need to understand that this is a problem you're going to run into at one point in time. You either fix it and build it into the architecture and operational platform as you build it, or you figure out how to change the tires on the truck rolling down the road, which is a much harder thing to do.
Yeah. Another phrase is jumping out of an airplane and figuring out how to make a parachute on the way down.
Yeah.
We've heard that one. If you are on LinkedIn, you'll see Dave making provocative statements and poking the bear and shaking people up. And a recent debate he was involved in was this concept of cloud washed. Well, so what does cloud washing mean anyway?
That's an old concept, and that was really 2009, 2008. That's when everybody just did a search and replace on their websites and whatever technology.
It's like AI today. Yeah, we're AI.
Yeah, their AI washing is going on just as radically now. And the reality is that everything became a cloud, And if everything's a cloud, nothing was a cloud. I even wrote a post in InfoWorld that they were defining cloud as everything, advertising as a service, and hardware as a service, people as a service. The reality is it was just kind of silly thing to do. Cloud had a particular set of design patterns, the ability to provision, the ability to change, those sorts of things, which were not part of every hardware system out there, which were not part of every website out there. And it really got silly. And so we still see it today where everything's cloud enabled and we're cloud, things like that. But we saw this, way like 2009, 2010, every hardware platform was called a cloud. And every virtualization system was called a cloud. And everybody thought they were running stuff in a cloud just because the name was on the device. And things got very silly. Fortunately, the industry got smart, and they started to push back on some of this silliness. And a lot of those folks realized that probably wasn't the best way to market their product. But, here we go again in 2023 with AI. Suddenly, everything's AI washed, and I even, I told a marketing manager today that was working for another company I'm working with. This is not about just search and replacing everything with AI. We have to be better than that. We have to look at how this technology is going to work and fit. And people are more savvy than they were 10 years ago. They understand that the marketing hype is going to say one thing, and they can't blindly follow it, or else they'll go down the wrong road.
Again, back to LinkedIn. You did a survey, I think, on LinkedIn. And you said, well, what should we name it? Is it Meta Cloud? Is it Super Cloud? Is it Dave's Cloud? Is it Super Duper Cloud? Hybrid Cloud? And you mentioned this on page 184 in your book. So what was the results of the survey? Survey says, what's the result? What are you going to call it?
It's called a Super Cloud, I think.
Super Cloud,
right. I am a father of the buzzword Meta Cloud. Oh. And I don't really want to be a father of a buzzword. But the reality is we're dealing with abstracted cloud services for years. We were talking about them with the whole cloud complexity management stuff, which has a concept been around for about 5 years and we're toying with. So that abstracted systems or set of systems that sits above the physical cloud providers is really what a super cloud or meta cloud is. And it's the ability to kind of do something at a logical layer using abstraction and automation by removing a lot of the direct connections to the physical underlying infrastructure. So the idea is that we can leverage storage using very similar services, compute using similar services, AI using similar services. We have the ability to implement it in any number of physical ways on the bottom with the public cloud providers. So that's what a super cloud is.
When I was in college back during the Civil War, I had a professor that would say, attack, defend, or modify this statement. And so I'm going to challenge you with that right here. And so there was an article that came out in the Harvard Business Review in 2013, and the headline is, Data Scientist, the sexiest job of the 21st century. So, attack, defend, or modify that, Dave. What do you think of that? Is that your claim to fame? Is that why you got involved in all this?
I don't necessarily agree with that, and I don't know anybody that's impressed by someone being a data scientist. I think maybe the fact that they normally make additional money than normal, and they're also in demand. That may be something that's going on. And also in many instances, we look at the ability to weaponize AI and weaponize data. Data scientists are going to be the soldiers that know how to aim those weapons, and that's going to be in huge need. So that's why people think it's sexy, is because the need, the development around it.
Well, that's an honest answer. I think your book has honest answers as well, because topic by topic, what you'll say is, here's the great things about this, and here's some things no one talks about this.
Right.
They'll talk about, non-native cloud security. And you'll give the positive and negative. You talk about storage. You talk about so many different aspects of it. It's a book goes almost section by section, and it's almost lawyerly. And on the other hand, we have 5 fingers. On the other hand, back and forth. But I think it's important because people can be deceived by this bright and shiny thing. And, whoa, yeah, it's all going to be at the edge. It's going to be easy, and it's not going to be complex, and we're not going to not be optimized. And I think that if we did a word cloud on this book, I think the word optimize may come up a lot, because a lot of times you'll say, well, if you're going to spend X amount of money, let's optimize that amount of money and not have any wasted services or underserve that. And so you have so many graphs in here where you talk about optimization, but that's not a phrase that comes up much from the vendors out there. They don't talk about optimization very much, do they?
No, they don't, because it's, quite frankly, if it's going to be part of the sales cycle, it may derail the sales cycle, because their technology may not be the optimal solution to leverage. And so, like I said, we can always get, if we have enough time and enough money, we can get to a state where it works. but it may be completely and grossly under-optimized, creating a huge amount of technical debt. And people have a tendency not to look at that. And now they're starting to look at it now that we have the rise of FinOps and we have metrics where we can evaluate the value of this stuff as it sits in an operational state. And we also leverage AI systems to evaluate it. So we'll start seeing the fact that many of these architectures and many of these systems that are brought together and many of the solutions that have been pushed upon them, over the last 20 years are going to be way under-optimized, and they're going to have to be corrected at some point in time to get those resources back into the business or back in the agency so they can do more good.
I've heard of DevSecOps and DevOps and AIOps, but never ThinOps. So what are ThinOps?
Financial operations, yeah.
Fin with F.
Yeah,
FinOps.
And it kind of emerged over the last. It's been around for a long time, but as a formal thing. With the FinOps Foundation that basically talks about accounting for and dealing with cloud costs, cloud optimization, the ability to leverage cloud computing in a much more cost-efficient way. But basically it's about observability, understanding what's going on, who's spending what on what's really costing, what kind of value is being brought back to the business, not just in terms of cost savings, but in terms of agility value, go-to-market value, time-to-market value, things like that we typically are very myopic on. So we know cloud is good. We just don't know how good or how bad. FinOps will tell you what the scorecard is in terms of the cost.
I've talked to several people who are going to attend a DevSecOps event in October. And in your book, you talk about, development's better in the cloud. And what you mentioned, which is some people may not even realize that this whole DevOps environment started before the cloud got popular and kind of developing right into the cloud. It's like hand in glove. It's a perfect match, isn't it?
It is. And the reality is that we had to take a hybrid approach to DevOps for many, long period of time where a lot of the development tools still resided on premise.
Yep.
Now where the R&D is being spent and the development, the people who are building the tools where they're spending their money, it's going to be in cloud 90% of the time. So that's typically going to be a better, superior environment for implementing DevOps because you've got to remember we're not dealing with operational applications of systems. We're just dealing with tooling and building things like that. It provides better sharing, better resource utilization, all these things that cloud provides. And so that's why the DevOps companies, the tool providers, and people who create tool chains are focusing on creating those things in the cloud, and for good reason.
I like to impress people with quoting famous scientists. So I'm going to quote a guy named Niels Bohr, and he once said that prediction is difficult, especially about the future. And I think Yogi Berra might have stole that. So you're a big smart guy. You've written all the books. You've talked to all the people. You've been in the trenches. So where do you see this happening in the next 4 or 5 years? Do you think there's going to be an incident? There's going to be a move back on site? Is there going to be more development in the cloud? Or where do you see it projected in the next 5 years, Dave?
It's a great question, John. I think what's going to happen is a normalization of the resources out there. And so everybody loves to move to a particular platform. And so 10 years ago it was moving everything into the cloud. Now it's moving into a multi-cloud and moving into hybrid cloud, things like that. It's going to be normalization of technologies across various platforms. That's going to be on-premise, edge computing in many instances, public cloud providers, a number of public cloud providers, also the rise of industry-specific clouds. They focus on particular verticals like finance, things like that. I call them micro clouds in the book. We're starting to see those emerge right now, and certainly with the advent of AI and large language models, we're going to see even more of those. So you get to kind of generally speaking, where is this going? We're going to go to ubiquitous computing, where we're going to spread everything out. We're going to leverage data, leverage processes where they exist. We're going to build them on the most optimized platform. There's that O word again. And we're going to be able to leverage and manage them in a way that allow these things to operate together as if they existed in the same building. The advent of 5G, high-speed networking, pervasive use of the internet is really going to provide this capability because it's going to be too expensive to every few years start moving this stuff around, which is what we've been doing. We said, okay, we're going to move it on the mainframe. Oh, the mainframe's no good. We're going to move it to a local area network. Oh, the local area network's going to need to be a client server, and now we're going to move it to service-oriented architecture. Oh, did we say service-oriented architecture? How about the cloud? We're going to move it to the cloud. Oh, at cloud, we have edge computing now. Yeah, we're going to move it to edge computing. And this kind of very chaotic, use of platforms. I used to call it managed by magazine until people stopped reading magazines. Really needs to stop. And so we need to leave the data and the applications on the platforms where they best reside. And that's why we're seeing repatriation these days. That's because some applications and data sets never should have went to the cloud, and we're putting them back where we found them. And we're seeing a good critical look at what these applications and workloads are doing and looking at what platform is going to be optimized to run those particular workloads. And it can be lots of stuff. Sometimes it can be the cloud. Sometimes it can be on-premise, edge computing. Same use as AI. We're looking at the pragmatic use of this application. Are we overusing it? Is there a good use case for making this happen? In many instances, we are AI washing these applications. We're force-fitting the technology into whatever application space is coming up. That can't scale. It's too expensive. We're going to be removing resources from the business. We're removing resources from the agencies. And we're not doing right by the folks who are actually building this stuff and configuring this stuff. We're building something that works, but hugely under-optimized, hugely expensive, and something that's going to remove resources from the business.
When you think about repatriation, there are some pundits have written that data centers are making a comeback. Maybe we're going to have some upside-down tools where cloud management tools are going to be applied to data center management. It's going to be some kind of a hybrid fusion system that maybe never even thought of 5-10 years ago. It could be some crazy thing like that.
Yeah, if you think about what a supercloud is, at least the way I'm defining it, it's something that's going to go across different platforms, including on-premise. And so we have abstraction in terms of security and operation systems, and that's not going to be only living in the cloud. And and different AI ops tools, that's artificial intelligent operations tools, are appearing these days that operate across between cloud and on-premise. We're starting to couple these environments together where it's able to basically support them any number of ways, and I think that's the right way to go. We got to get out of this thing. We're creating things that are too complex. If we're looking for whatever native tool to operate a particular silo, whether it's a cloud or on-premise systems, things like that, you have to keep the skill sets around to keep those going. Those tools are expensive. Things are going to be overly complex to operate. We need to get to commonality between tools that run across platforms, on-premise, cloud, edge computing, things like that. That has to happen, or else we're not going to have this stuff scale.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I have 2 more hours of questions, but David's an important man. He's got to go out and make some money. If you want more details, you can order the book, An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. Go to Amazon and find it. I'll have a link at the show notes page as well. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, David Linthicum, Chief Cloud Strategy Officer, Deloitte Consulting. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.